That night in Chicago promised to be just another one. That night in Chicago promised to be just another among so many others. The sky was heavy, the rain was pouring down, and the thunder made the windows shake. Inside the house, Michael, a 55-year-old man, tried to distract himself by watching a football game on TV, but his mind was far away. For days, he had been having strange nightmares. He always woke up drenched in sweat, haunted by the same recurring dream. Two girls with long hair, wearing soaked white dresses, standing at his doorstep, staring at him without saying a single word. The image of these girls tormented Michael's sleep in a way he couldn't explain. He never told anyone, not even the few friends he still talked to, not even his wife, who had passed away 3 years ago, victim of an aggressive cancer. Since then, loneliness had taken over that small 2-story house in the Bronzeville neighborhood. That night, around 9:30, the power went out. The whole city seemed to have been swallowed by a sudden blackout. Michael, holding a weak flashlight in his hands, went to the door to check if it was just his house, and it was at that moment that everything began. When he opened the door, Michael's heart nearly stopped, exactly like in the dreams. There they were, two identical girls, long black wet hair, white dresses clinging to their bodies from the rain, standing silent, just staring at him with eyes that seemed to carry an ancient pain. The shock was so great that Michael had to hold onto the doorframe to keep from falling. For a few seconds, time seemed frozen. He rubbed his eyes, thinking it was a hallucination. But when he opened them again, they were still there, in silence, motionless, as if time didn't pass for them. Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling. They didn't answer. They just kept staring at him with eyes so dark they looked like bottomless pits. Instinct took over. Michael, even without understanding what was happening, invited the girls inside. He couldn't leave them out there, in the rain, in the cold. He grabbed 2 towels, tried to dry their hair, but they remained silent, as if words were a language they didn't understand. He offered them food, but they didn't eat. He offered hot chocolate, and they didn't even touch the mug. They just sat on the couch side by side like 2 living statues, observing everything around them, especially him. As water dripped onto the living room floor, Michael started to feel something strange, a mix of fear and a déjà vu sensation he couldn't explain. It was as if those children had already been part of his life, even though he was sure he had never seen them before. Then, as he looked closer at their faces, Michael felt his stomach twist. The features, the eyes, the shape of the face. Everything seemed incredibly familiar. They looked like a mix between him and someone he had known a long time ago. He went to his bedroom, pulled out an old photo hidden at the back of a drawer, a yellowed picture from when he was young. In it, there he was, next to a woman who had marked his life but whom he had made every effort to erase from memory. When he looked at the photo, the shock was inevitable. The girls were the exact copy of that woman. Fear gave way to despair. Michael kept asking himself how that was possible. Who were those girls? Why did they look like someone he had buried in the past? And the most disturbing question, why now? Why that night? Then one of them for the first time opened her mouth and said, in a low, almost whispering voice, "We came to take what's ours." Michael froze. His heart raced. A million thoughts flooded his mind. What did they mean by that? Take what? Or who? Now, the audience watching needs to ask themselves, what did these mysterious twins really come for? What secret has Michael been hiding all these years, and how far is he willing to go to protect what's left of his life? Stay with me until the end, because what will be revealed in this story is something that will shake you in ways you never imagined. And I guarantee you the ending will catch you by surprise. Michael paced back and forth in the living room, his hands trembling. His head felt like a whirlwind of thoughts, mixing old memories with a growing fear he couldn't control. The girls remained seated on the couch, silent, following his every move with those fixed, dark, deep eyes. The rain outside continued fiercely, as if the whole sky was crashing down over Seattle that night. He picked up the phone to call the police, but something inside made him stop before dialing. What explanation would he give? That too mysterious. Girls appeared at his doorstep during the storm, that they resembled someone from his past he preferred to forget. Michael set the phone down on the table with a heavy sigh, feeling a lump in his throat. He tried talking to them again, asked where they came from, where their parents were, if they needed help, but the two remained silent, only exchanging discreet glances between each other, as if communicating in silence. Michael began to sense something supernatural in their presence. The girls didn't behave like normal children. They showed no fear, no hunger, no cold. It was as if they were there for a very specific purpose. Memories started invading his mind, even though he tried to fight them off. Memories from a time he'd done everything to forget, from when he was a young engineering student before meeting his wife, from the turbulent relationship with a woman named Rebecca, a story marked by secret meetings, fights, and a breakup that left deep wounds. Rebecca was the great secret of Michael's life, an intense, unpredictable woman with whom he had a forbidden romance for almost 2 years. They met in a bar near the university and soon were in a relationship that consumed them from the inside. But when Rebecca said she was pregnant, Michael vanished. He panicked, moved to another city, got a job far away, and never wanted to hear from her again. Years passed, and Michael built a new life. He got married, had a son who moved abroad, and after his wife's death, locked himself into that solitary routine. But now, with those 2 girls there, the whole story seemed to return with overwhelming force. Suddenly, one of the girls stood up. She walked slowly to the bookshelf in the living room, where there was a framed photo of Michael's family. She picked up the photo and looked at it closely. The other sister remained seated, her eyes following every movement of her sibling. Michael watched everything in silence, unsure of what to say or do. His heart raced when the girl turned the frame toward him and for the first time spoke clearly. This woman, she knew. Michael felt his legs give out. He sat in the armchair, his face pale. He tried to ask what it meant, but his voice failed him. As he tried to collect himself, he heard a noise at the front door. He jumped up, ran over, opened it quickly, but no one was there, just rain and cold wind entering the house. When he returned to the living room, he noticed something strange. The girls were no longer on the couch. They had vanished in seconds. Desperation overtook him. He ran through the entire house, opened every door, every room, but found no trace of them. It was as if they had never been there. The floor was still wet with their small footprints, but beyond that, nothing. Michael began to question his sanity. Was he going crazy? He decided to go outside into the street despite the storm, shouting names he didn't even know, calling girls, "Please come back," as if that could bring them back. But the street was deserted. Neighbors sheltering inside had no idea what was happening. Soaked and cold, Michael returned inside, sat on the couch again, trembling, trying to determine if it had all been just another nightmare from the past weeks. But when he looked at the coffee table, he saw something that made his blood run cold. 2 rag dolls. Small, old, with white dresses and braided black hair. He was absolutely certain those dolls hadn't been there before. He picked one up and on closer inspection saw a detail that took his breath away. A small seam on the side of the doll's head, exactly like a scar Rebecca had on her forehead from a childhood accident she always resented. The past was there, materialized before him, demanding repayment of a debt he never imagined would return. And at that moment, Michael knew Those girls, those twins, had a direct connection to everything he'd buried in his memory nearly 3 decades ago. He decided he needed to find the truth, no matter how much it hurt, no matter what he would have to face. The next morning he would go searching for answers, even if it meant revisiting places he had sworn never to set foot in again. That night, as he tried to fall asleep, Michael felt a presence near the bed. He opened his eyes suddenly, and there they were again, standing at the foot of the bed, wet, with fixed eyes, and an expression of sadness that pierced his soul. Before he could say anything, one of the girls whispered, "Tomorrow, everything will begin." Michael closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and knew that what was coming would be just the beginning of something much larger than he imagined. The next morning, the sky was still heavy, but the rain had given a brief respite. Antonio had barely slept, and the few hours of rest were plagued by confusing nightmares where he saw the girls walking through dark hallways, calling out to him with distant voices. When he woke up, his body felt heavy, as if he had carried the weight of the world on his shoulders all night. He sat on the edge of the bed, took a deep breath, and decided it was time to face everything buried in his conscience. The first thing he did was grab the old photo album stored in the guest room closet. He hadn't opened that album in over 20 years. The pages were yellowed, some photos faded, but there she was, Lucia. That striking smile, the bright eyes, the scar on her forehead. And in some photos, her hand gently resting on her pregnant belly. Antonio closed his eyes tightly, feeling a sharp stab of guilt pierce his chest. He never knew if she had actually had the children. At the time, he had run from responsibility, as if that would erase the problem. With the album under his arm, Antonio grabbed his car keys and drove toward the neighborhood where Lucia had lived back then. Bom Jesus. At every corner, ghosts from the past seemed to whisper in his ear. The streets looked different now. New buildings had taken the place of old houses, but his memory seemed to guide him automatically to the address where she once lived. He stopped in front of the rusty gate, took a deep breath, and rang the doorbell. An elderly woman answered with gray hair, tired eyes, but still a firm expression. Antonio introduced himself, and before he could even say his last name, she recognized him. "You're Antonio, aren't you? I thought I'd never see your face around here again," she said with a mix of anger and relief. It was Donna Marta, Lucia's mother. His heart raced. The last time he saw her, she had thrown him out of the house, screaming and calling him a coward. Antonio asked if they could talk. Donna Marta hesitated but let him in. The living room was filled with old photos. He looked around, trying to find any image that could give him a clue about the girls. They sat down, and she went straight to the point. "You came looking for the girls, didn't you? They found you before you came looking for me, just as I expected." Antonio was in shock. "So it's true. They are my daughters." The old woman took a deep breath, her eyes filled with tears, and began to tell the story. Lucia had indeed had the twins. It was a difficult pregnancy, alone, with no support from anyone. She named the girls Helena and Elisa. She spent years raising them with her mother's help, but when the girls were only 5 years old, a car accident took Lucia's life. Since then, Donna Marta had been responsible for them. Life had been hard. Many problems, financial struggles, and little by little, the girls began to show strange behavior. Donna Marta explained that since they were little, the twins showed an unusual, almost supernatural connection. They had the same dreams, got sick at the same time, and were obsessed with meeting their father. For years they asked about Antonio. They wanted to know who he was, where he lived, why he never wanted to know them. Their grandmother always avoided the subject until in recent weeks they started acting even stranger. Helena and Elisa began waking up in the middle of the night, saying they saw their father in dreams. They described his house in detail, things that Donna Marta couldn't explain how they knew. They even talked about the green armchair in the living room and the family photo on the shelf. They said they felt the time was coming to meet him. On that last stormy night, both disappeared from home. By the time their grandmother realized, it was too late. Antonio was so shocked that he needed a few minutes to process everything. He asked if the police had been called, but Donna Marta explained that this had happened before. They would disappear and then reappear as if they knew exactly where they were going. But this time, their destination had been his house, and now they were back. Antonio thanked her for the conversation, but he felt there were still many unanswered questions. Before he left, Donna Marta grabbed his arm and said something that sent chills down his spine. They found you, but what they really want, only you can discover, and maybe you won't like what you're going to hear. Back in the car, Antonio drove aimlessly through the streets of Porto Alegre. His mind was boiling. He felt fear, guilt, and confusion. He decided to go to the cemetery where Lucia was buried. Upon arriving, he walked among the graves until he found the simple tombstone with her name engraved. He stood there, staring at that cold stone, as if somehow it could give him answers. Then, in the middle of the silence, he heard childish laughter behind him. Startled, he turned around, and there they were, the two girls, Helena and Elisa, standing by a tree, their white dresses now dry, their hair loose and swaying with the wind. One of them smiled, but there was something unsettling about that smile. The other just stared at him, serious, as if she could see right through him. Antonio walked towards them, slowly, his heart racing. Before he could say anything, one of them spoke. "This is the beginning, Daddy, just the beginning." The phrase echoed in his head like thunder. He tried to get closer, but the girls started running, disappearing among the tombstones. He ran after them, desperate, but when he turned, the next row of graves, there was no sign of them. The cemetery was empty. The wind whistled through the trees, and Antonio, kneeling on the ground, felt despair take over every part of his body. Back home, he once again found the two rag dolls on the table, as if someone had placed them there on purpose. But now there was something new, a note written in childish handwriting. On it, only one sentence: "If you want answers, look inside yourself." At that moment, Antonio realized that this search wouldn't be just for external answers. He would have to revisit everything he had buried deep inside for so long. He knew that the next night would bring even more questions, and perhaps some painful truths. As night once again fell over Porto Alegre, he locked all the doors and windows, but deep down he knew no lock would be able to stop what was coming. Night fell heavy, as if the very air inside the house had become denser. Antonio could barely breathe. His hands trembled as he turned off the lights and locked every door and window, as if that could protect him from something he couldn't even define. The only light came from the television, playing a random newscast at low volume, but he wasn't paying attention to the news. His mind was far too busy trying to understand what was happening. Sitting in the living room armchair, holding the two rag dolls in his hands, Antonio stared at the note he had found earlier. The phrase, "If you want answers, look inside yourself," kept pounding in his mind non-stop. What did that mean? What exactly did he need to face? Fear from the past? Guilt? Buried memories? Or something even darker he couldn't imagine? Around 11 at night, the power went out. A loud crack, followed by complete silence. The lights went off, the TV shut down, and the house plunged into near total darkness. Antonio grabbed a flashlight he kept in the kitchen drawer and began walking through the rooms. With each step, he felt as if someone was watching him, as if the very walls had eyes, following his every move. He went upstairs to the bedroom, but when he opened the door, he got such a fright that he dropped the flashlight to the floor. In the middle of the room, the two girls were sitting on the edge of the bed. They looked at him without saying a single word. Antonio froze. His first instinct was to run, but something held him in place. His legs wouldn't move. His voice failed him. He was completely paralyzed by fear. After a few seconds that felt like an eternity, one of them finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but filled with sadness. "You need to remember, Daddy. Everything started here." Antonio didn't understand immediately. He tried to ask what that meant, but before he could react, the girls vanished right before his eyes, as if they were just a shadow, a ghost, a delusion of his mind. Terrified and panicked, he ran back downstairs to the living room. He needed air. He needed to understand what was happening. He went to the bookshelf, grabbed an old box where he kept documents and old photos. He began rummaging through everything in desperation. Papers scattered across the floor, photos falling everywhere, and at the bottom of the box, he found a letter. A letter Lucia had written to him, but he never had the courage to open. With trembling hands, he tore open the envelope. The words, written in her handwriting, were direct and full of hurt. She spoke of the pain of being abandoned, of the loneliness during pregnancy, of the struggle to raise the girls alone. And at the end of the letter, a confession that nearly stopped Antonio's heart. Lucia said that before she died, she had left the girls with a woman named Jandira, an old lady who lived on a remote farm in the rural area of Gravatai. Antonio didn't think twice. Even with the rain starting to fall again outside, he grabbed his car keys and drove there. The road was dark, full of curves, and each lightning bolt lit up the landscape around him for just a few seconds. When he finally arrived at the farm, he saw the gate was wide open. The place seemed abandoned. No lights on, no sounds, except for the wind and rain. He entered cautiously, calling out for Jandira, but there was no response. He walked to the door and pushed it open slowly. The smell of mold and old wood was strong. In the middle of the living room, on a wooden table, there was a photo album. Antonio approached, opened the album, and the shock was immediate. Several photos of the twins, from babies to their current age. But what terrified him the most was seeing, among the photos, pictures of himself. Photos taken from a distance, as if someone had been watching him for years. Despair took over Antonio. Who was behind all this? Why would someone have photos of him? And how did those girls know everything about him, even though they had never lived together? That's when he heard a creak coming from the back of the house. Holding the flashlight tightly, he slowly walked towards the sound. He opened the door and found a small room with walls covered in children's drawings. The drawings showed two girls holding hands, always walking towards a male figure with features very similar to Antonio's. It was as if they had spent their entire lives drawing the reunion with their father. On top of the bed, a child's dress was carefully folded, next to a necklace. He immediately recognized the same one Lucia wore every day. Not knowing what was real and what was delusion, Antonio began to wonder if all this was some kind of conspiracy, or if he was truly losing his mind. He ran out of the house, got back into his car, and sped back toward Porto Alegre, his heart pounding wildly. But when he arrived home, the scene he found left him speechless. The front door was wide open. The lights, which had come back on, were now flickering erratically, and in the middle of the living room, the two girls were there, waiting for him. But this time, they weren't alone. Behind them, on the wall, a female shadow with features identical to Lucia's seemed to be watching him with a look of pain and accusation. Antonio fell to his knees. He began to cry, begging for forgiveness, saying he was sorry, that if he had known everything sooner, he would have done things differently. The girls approached, each holding one of his hands, and for the first time their eyes also filled with tears. The shadow on the wall slowly faded, as if it had accepted his apology. But before disappearing completely, Lucia's voice echoed. through the living room. Now, you know who they are, but you still need to understand why they came. Antonio remained there in silence, with the weight of an entire lifetime on his shoulders. He knew the biggest revelation was still to come, and that the answer to everything was closer than he imagined. The night was long. The clock seemed frozen. Antonio sat on the living room floor with the girls beside him, trying to find the courage to face what awaited him with the sunrise. The sunrise arrived, bringing a pale light through the living room window. Michael hadn't slept a wink all night. He spent hours sitting on the floor between the two girls who slept as if nothing had happened. His head felt like it was about to explode with so many unanswered questions. Who exactly were those children? Why had they come to him now? And most importantly, what did that shadow of Lucia watching everything mean? Carefully, he got up and went to the kitchen to make some coffee. His hands still trembled. As the water boiled, he stared intently at the stove's flame, as if searching for some answer in the small blue flickers. When he returned to the living room, he found the girls awake, sitting side by side on the couch, their eyes fixed on him, as if they already knew what he was thinking. It was Helena who spoke first, with a calm voice but carrying a strange maturity. "For someone so young," she said, "we came because you need to remember, and because—" she asked. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. Elisa, right after, added, "She wants you to know the truth, the whole truth." His heart beat strongly. He took a deep breath and knelt before the two. "What truth? What are you talking about?" The girls looked at each other and, as if they had rehearsed this for years, began to tell what they knew. They said that on the night of the accident that took Lucia's life, she was not alone in the car. There was another person with her, a woman, a social worker named Jandira. The two were actually on their way to Michael's house with the twins, in the back seat, to finally introduce them to their father. But a truck invaded the lane and everything happened too fast. Lucia and Jandira died instantly. The girls miraculously survived. Mrs. Marta never told this part of the story to Michael, out of anger, pain, or simply because she thought he didn't deserve to know. Throughout all those years, the girls grew up with that absence, hearing distorted stories and carrying the longing for a mother they barely knew. Michael felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. The weight of guilt seemed to double with every word he heard. As if that weren't enough, the girls opened a little box they carried with them and showed a series of notes and letters that Lucia had written over the years, but that never reached him. Each paper contained declarations of love, apologies, and most importantly, a wish that one day he could meet the daughters and build a new story with them. The emotion was so overwhelming that Michael couldn't hold back his tears. He cried like a child, hugging the two with all the strength he had. He felt weak, vulnerable, but at the same time, relieved to finally know the truth. He promised right then and there that he would do everything in his power to make up for lost time, but fate seemed to have one more surprise in store. While hugging his daughters, Michael heard the living room's landline phone ring. He didn't remember the last time that phone had worked. His heart racing, he stood up and answered. On the other end of the line, a female voice, low and whispered, said only one phrase, "Now that you know, are you ready for what comes next?" Before he could ask anything, the call dropped. Michael dropped the phone, completely confused. He looked at the girls, who just smiled, as if this had been expected. Then, on the living room shelf, something caught his attention. The old photo frame holding a picture of him and Lucia had changed. Now, in the photograph, the two girls were also there, as if they had always been part of that memory. Desperation and sanity seemed to battle inside him. He held the photo in his hands, rubbed his eyes, but the image stayed the same. The girls were there, as if the past had been rewritten. Or maybe, as if the real memory was finally coming back. Sitting again in the armchair, Michael took a deep breath. He knew nothing would ever be the same. Lost time could never be recovered, but the future, that was still in his hands. The girls approached, held his hands, and together the three remained silent, as if waiting for the next chapter of this story that clearly was not over yet. In the middle of this silence, the doorbell rang. Michael slowly got up, walked to a door, and when he opened it, there was no one there, just an envelope left on the floor with his name written by hand. Opening it, he found only one phrase: "Every truth has many layers. Some you're not ready to hear yet." With one last look at his daughters, Michael understood that this story was only just beginning. He closed the door, took a deep breath, and for the first time in many years felt truly alive. If you've stayed until here, I want to invite you. Leave in the comments which city you're watching from. Also tell me, have you ever lived through a story that seemed impossible to explain? I really want to read your story. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and turn on the notification bell, because the next stories will touch your heart even more.